welcome to our Periscope, our weekly Monday Periscope. Some kind of music is playing.
Is it you? Someone's gonna have to get spanked.
Hello.
I didn't do that
Hello,
on
everybody.
purpose.
Thanks for
That's right.
tuning in. Hi. So we're here. I'm Domina Dynasty, and
I'm Lucy Sweetkill, fixing my very wet and long hair.
we are professional dominatrixes in New York City. Thanks for joining our weekly La Maison de Rouge Periscope broadcast. And today we have our collective slave. His name is Big Baby G. And if you follow Twitter, follow us on Twitter. Or Instagram, we've actually broadcast a few fun little clips of him in very entertaining form.
Which is how he got his name. So for those of you who ever wonder how certain slaves get their name, it's usually in the moment.
Mm-hmm. It's a very organic process.
Yeah. And so Big Baby G got it when we dressed him up like a really amazing big baby.
Big baby.
Because we got a new hood, a new mask.
Mm-hmm. And it's a big crying baby head. So, and that is his avatar on Twitter.
Yeah.
So, again, welcome. And so we want to introduce Big Baby G as our slave who has come to our ownership through having sessions with us. And so he identifies as a submissive male. And why don't you tell us a little more about yourself?
Professionally, personally,
All of the above.
sexually.
So I'm going to ask you some questions. That would be better. So, a little background info for you audience out there. Big Baby G came to us requesting some time to serve both of us. He came very respectfully with references from some really amazing doms out there. And, you know, because he came to us in such a respectful way, we decided that we would see him, and a relationship grew very naturally by not only his demeanor and how he came to us. He didn't come demanding to be our slave or anything, and us kind of seeing this thing in him. So, you know, so then from there we kind of grew this relationship over the last 7-8 months now. And so for those of you out there who want to know how this happens, that is how it happens.
Mm-hmm.
So, but before that, you know, how Big Baby G got to this place of who he is and how he identifies, you know, there's obviously a story, right? And so first, why don't you let us know when you kind of started to realize that something was a bit different?
Well, I will tell you that. But first, I will say that these last 7 or 8 months have been the most satisfying and deeply spiritual time in my life. Mistress Lucy and Goddess Dia have been tremendous with me and to me, and I've learned a lot, including, as they mentioned earlier, how to live in the moment.
Wonderful.
Which is why I'm here tonight, living in the moment.
Yes.
I grew up in a small town on the outskirts of Appalachia. All my family were coal miners, and I remember the first time, I mean, I always knew that there was something a little different about me from the other kids, but the first time I knew what I was, although I didn't really have words for it, was 1960. And I was about 8 years old at the time. And I know it was 1960 because in the World Series, the New York Yankees lost to the Pittsburgh Pirates in the bottom of the 9th inning of Game 7. And I could go on and on about that World Series, but it was like my first baseball year. And As most of the Yankee fans listening will know, Bill Mazeroski of the Pirates hit a home run in the bottom of the ninth with the score tied in Game 7, and World Series over. Also that year, we only had one television station, and I was watching a Cowboys and Indians movie. And it's unfortunate that my awakening happened during a movie where the United States government was committing genocide, but nevertheless, that is what happened. And there was, I forget even the whole story, but there was a scout for the cavalry, and the general for the cavalry was bloodthirsty, and he was planning to exterminate an Indian village. The scout was the good guy, and he was going to try to stop it. And he went to the village alone, and the Indians captured him. And they put him in what looked to me like a pretty good hog tie. He was laying on his stomach in a teepee alone, and a beautiful Indian princess walked into the teepee. And she had a deerskin bag in one hand, and she had a big knife in the other hand. I'm there, and I'm entranced. He's tied up, he's hog-tied. She has a knife. And what's she gonna do? Is she gonna cut his ropes and let him go? Is she gonna stab him? What is she gonna do? She stabs the knife into the ground and lifts his head up gently and gives him a drink of water out of the deerskin canteen. And I said, I want to be that guy. That's what all these stirred up feelings in my life up to this point are. I want to be that guy. And as a matter of fact, as Miss D and Miss Lucy can still tell you, the hog tie is still my favorite position. But then that was when I learned. I learned something. My little mind didn't quite know what to make of it, but I knew what I wanted. So it must have been within a month or so when my mom and dad went out somewhere, and they would hire a woman in our neighborhood to be our babysitter. Not a woman, a high school girl. And I had a younger sister, and the high school girl came down to babysit. And she said, well, what do we want to do tonight? And I said, well, we want to play Cowboys and Indians, you know? And I want to be the cowboy, and I want you to be the Indian princess, and I want you to tie me up. And, you know, the look I got was not encouraging. The look I got was like, what is wrong with you? What is wrong with this kid? And that's how I grew up. I grew up clear through high school thinking that I was probably the only person in the world that had these feelings. You know, this was like 1960 through maybe 66 or 67. I didn't know porn stores. This was Appalachia. There was only one television station. I thought I was the only person in the world.
So after telling that babysitter what you hoped to play, did you ever share that with anybody else?
Not so well.
Because of her reaction?
I shared it with more than one psychologist.
Okay, but none of your friends or
No,
like
that taught me to be ashamed.
younger. Okay.
That taught me to be ashamed of myself.
So when did you, so as you're growing up and you're sort of hiding this stuff about yourself, right?
Yes.
When did you get to the point where you were exploring it more, even in secret, but exploring it more, and it started to tie into sort of your sexuality?
Well, that tied into my sexuality almost immediately.
Yeah, but when were you like, but when you're, 8, you're not actually like practicing
No,
your
you're right, you're not.
So when, as you grew up, even though you were hiding this in high school, you were hiding this, when did you get to the point where you started to explore it more, even by yourself or with others, when you actually started to put it out there a little?
Well, I explored it secretly, of course.
By yourself?
Yeah, well, by myself, and I would go out with girls in high school who, in some way, struck me as strong and powerful. That's who I liked. That's, a woman that would take charge and direct things. That's who I liked. And at home, in bed at night, I would like tie myself up, you know.
Oh, okay.
Things like that's how I got through.
Okay. So when you started becoming sexually active, when was the beginning of incorporating kink into your sexual activity?
Oh, it was there from the instant I started, only it was just in my mind. It was not in reality. I actually lost my virginity at a fairly young age. I was 13, and the whole time I was fantasizing that I was tied up, or that she had me captive, or afterwards I was going to have to get up and serve her lunch. Well, you know, whatever came into my mind, it made it exciting to me.
So you had a lot of, beyond just the tying up and being the helpless, you had a lot of the service, sort of serving her, doing something for her, fantasies as well.
I did, yes.
Which I think is a very important distinction, because there are sexual fantasies that happen that are very selfish, and not to say that's a bad thing, but where you want something done to you, right? Being tied up while somebody is controlling you. And then there are those feelings, and those for me are just like kinky, you know, sexual feelings. And then it goes even deeper, where the idea of, like, you fantasize about serving her, making her a meal afterwards, doing something for her, which then for me is part of really identifying submission, which is different, because I don't think you have to be submissive to want to get tied up, you know?
True.
But to fantasize about then making her a meal after this, or, you know, something like that, serving her in these very non-sexual ways, I think that's where the identity of submission comes in.
Well, that's true, and it's true to this day. I mean, we have our sessions, but the two things that make me the happiest is when I have pleased you, Miss Lucy, and when I've made you laugh, Miss Dia. Those are the things that give me joy.
I think I think the point that Lucy's making is important in distinguishing, like, sexual fantasies versus, like, almost like an emotional need to submit, and you were talking about that when you serve us, it makes you actually happy, and it's not like it makes you aroused and gives you an orgasm when you serve us. It's an emotional fulfillment.
Yeah.
And spiritual,
Okay.
and psychic, and all different kinds of things.
All of the things.
Yes, yes, indeed.
So then, okay, so you started to, you fantasized about it in your sexual activity. When did you start realizing there was a world of kink and BDSM and dominant women and mistresses and all of that fun?
Well, there's a funny story.
Oh, good.
And my life is full of funny stories. I grew up and like my dad, I went to work in a coal mine, and I worked there for a number of years, and 8 to be exact, and went to Washington, D.C. and I had a job offered to me, and I went, and I was there for maybe a year, and they had a paper called the City Paper. This would have been like 1982, maybe 1983, and of course no internet, but on the back page they had ads in the City Paper, and one of them said, Mistress Amazon, seeing new clients, and no photos, no nothing.
Yeah.
But I said, this has got to be what I've been looking for.
Oh.
And so I called the number.
Was there any other description
No,
besides that?
No. Mistress Amazon.
But
Now,
so how
taking
did
new
you
clients.
know, like, how did you know that was something like
Oh, pornography.
just,
Oh,
okay.
Yeah,
So you'd already learned
I
through
learned
pornography
about,
kind
yes.
of
In
the language.
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, because I'd be like, mistress, what? How is
What does
yeah.
that even
No,
mean?
I knew exactly what it meant.
Okay.
And so I made an appointment, and she told me where to come, and I was so paranoid and ashamed. I parked my car like 3 blocks from her house, and nobody could see it or anything. But I was so afraid of somebody finding out. and so ashamed, but nevertheless driven. And so I go to the house. It's a row house in Northwest DC, and knock on the door, and this woman opens the door, and my socks are not. She's dressed in leather. She has boots. She's a big black woman. I mean, not fat, big, like 6'2",
Wow.
well filled out. And I remember she had these startling green eyes.
Ooh.
And she invited me in, and she asked me what I like to do, and I told her I like to get tied up, and I like to do things that I'm told to do. And so she knew it was my first time, and I admitted it was my first time.
How old
And
were you?
How old was I?
Yeah.
I would have been 27, 28. And so first thing she had me do was rub her feet with lotion and rub her legs with lotion.
That's my favorite first thing to do.
As a matter of fact,
That's my
I think
favorite
I remember
all the time
that.
thing to do.
As a matter of fact, I think I remember that. Then she had me lay on my back, and she left the room, and I heard her coming down the stairs with all these chains clanging and rattling. And she put these chains on and padlocked them, so there was no way I was leaving unless she let me go. And I was laying perpendicular to her chair, throne-like chair, I might add. And she put one of her feet on my face, and I was like halfway to heaven. And she put her other foot on my penis, and I immediately exploded. I mean, immediately.
Like you were
Like
15 again.
Yes, I was ready. And she laughed and laughed and laughed, and not in a mean way.
But this was like maybe, what, 15, 20 minutes in? Or
Oh,
how-
yeah,
how-
it was
okay.
maybe half an hour.
Okay.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, her foot just touched my penis, and it just like, which, I have to say, people think, well, geez, he's submissive, he's whatever. I'll tell you what, we have better orgasms than vanilla people. By a lot. I mean, by a lot. But Mistress Amazon just laughed and laughed and laughed, and she said, "That's okay, honey." She said, "You come back next Saturday." She says, "It'll be half price."
Oh.
And I said, "Oh man, this is great." So I came, I saw her for several times. That was my initial
That's
experience.
awesome.
So I want to go back to when you were looking at porn. So obviously this was a time of like magazines and not so easy. You couldn't just like swipe through all this porn that you can
No.
now. So you had to look, right?
You had to find a store.
a store.
You had to be willing to go in.
Yeah. And so how are you finding these kinky, like what kinky magazines, and how were you like finding them?
Well, the porn stores had the soft stuff. I mean, where I lived, it was maybe 20 miles to a small city,
Yeah.
and there was like one porn store in it. And so, in late high school, and when I was working in the mines, I found my way to it.
Okay.
And I found my way to other porn stores.
And you always went alone.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
I would
okay.
never admit to anybody that this is the way I felt.
Sure.
I never would have even considered it. And I bought the porn, and then, of course, I had to hide it. But it provided many happy times.
Was there a dark section in these porn stores? Because,
Yeah.
was it sectioned out where they're like, here's the soft area?
Yeah, and then you have to go behind the doors to go to the hardcore area, which had other stuff besides, dominant women, submissive men. It had every kind of
What they consider
sexual,
hardcore.
hardcore.
Okay.
Some of them really ugly, I thought. I
Yeah.
mean, some of the stuff, of course, what I do is not, I'm being funny. I don't think what I do is ugly. I'm very happy with myself and very happy with where I find myself at this point in my life as it creeps toward its end.
Good. Well, there's no reason to shame anybody else's kinks, right?
Well, unless it's non-consensual, and unless you're really
That's
hurting
not-
somebody.
yeah, that's
You know.
definitely-
And there were those magazines in those stores.
Really?
Yes,
Oh,
I
wow.
believe they were.
Wow.
But
Less regulation and in that sense. I think
Yes.
things can be regulated a little bit more still out there.
I think you're right.
So now you had your first dominant, your first mistress experience.
Mhm.
And so
Yes.
you saw her a few times.
Like at least 6 or 7, yes.
Okay. And then where did you go from there?
Well, she had told me about an organization in Washington where I was living. It was called the Black Rose. It is the equivalent of New York City's Test.
Okay.
And I got up the nerve to go to a meeting. We had meetings every Tuesday night, and I fell in love. I fell in love. Everybody was. I mean, they weren't like me. Not everybody was a submissive man, but everybody was into BDSM. That's what it was about. And somebody would give a class every week or a talk, and there were parties, and I became friends with the main guy, the guy who organized the Black Roses. He's dead now. His name was Jack McGeorge.
Oh, yeah.
Somebody
Oh.
just R.I.P. Jack
Yeah.
McGeorge.
Yes, they did.
Yeah.
And
That's Grindhouse.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's because. Well, that's we're getting ahead of ourselves,
We'll
but
get
but
Yes, we're
we'll
getting
get there. Grindhouse. Well, I'll talk about Grindhouse later, but
Yes.
it is
We'll plug it.
a fine establishment. But I got to know Jack McGeorge, and he was Mr. BDSM, not just in D.C., but all over. He was famous. He was as out can be. He was a former Secret Service agent, of all things.
Wow.
And then he got his own agency, and it turns out that I knew Jack years and years before, during a coal miners' strike,
Oh, wow.
when the coal companies hired Jack's agency to come down and help bust the strike. So,
On a very different side.
yeah, well, we were on opposite sides.
Yeah.
But through BDSM, we didn't resolve our differences, but we recognized the humanity in each other.
Oh, that's
That's
really
amazing.
important.
And
It's okay to disagree.
yes,
Yes.
and because I became friends with him, I started to get invited to like the real insider type parties where, like the Black Rose had maybe 80 or 90 people, but the parties that Jack had were maybe 25. And he had a really nice dungeon in his basement. And I started meeting people. I met a few dominant women who were not professionals. Some professionals came to Black Rose meetings and to the parties. And I met a lot of submissive women who I became quite close friends with. And when we were without dominant partners, we would play with each other.
Oh, that's awesome.
And and we all knew how to do it, of course.
So would you top?
We talked about everything. That was
No, top. Would you
Oh,
top
talk.
them?
I would talk. Yes, I would
Okay.
take my turn. Yes, I would do the best I could. Sometimes it was fun, but I didn't get an emotional or sexual charge out of it.
Yeah.
But I liked making them happy.
Yeah.
I liked getting them off. And and there were some things about having control that were interesting to me. And I think when they talked to me, they felt the same way. And we just had fun with each other.
Yeah.
At one point, as I told Miss Dia, we were considering starting a union for submissives and slaves. But then I thought, who would be in charge?
Who would be the leader of
Who
that?
would be in charge? There's nobody. But anyhow, that was my Black Rose experience. And while I was in Washington, I went to law school at night and worked during the day, and got my law degree. And I came to New York because this is where I always wanted to live since I was a little kid. My dad brought us to New York in 1964 because I think he was stationed here for a couple months during World War II, and he wanted us to see it. And boy, did I see it! I fell in love. and I said, I'm
It's
going
an
to live there
exciting
someday.
city.
Yeah, so I came then, and that's how I ended up here.
So then when you were here, that's when you started to also get into the kink and BDSM scene, correct?
Did you?
Well,
Yeah.
sorry.
Did you seek out Tess and?
I did seek out Tess,
Uh-huh.
and I mean that was the first thing I did.
Mm-hmm.
For one reason or another, I didn't click with Tess.
Okay.
This is New York, and people are different, and
Yes.
Washington is essentially a small town, and I am, despite the impression I'm probably giving, I'm a shy person until I know people.
Okay. So did you feel like maybe they weren't as welcoming to you, or?
It could have been my imagination, but
Right.
that's how I felt.
Okay. Yeah, I mean,
Like,
it's
who's this guy? It's just another sub. They're a dime a dozen.
it's a big city. People come and go. You know, you can't like always invest all your energy into every single newcomer. Even though I think that it is important to acknowledge, you know, when people do put themselves out there, that it is important to be like, hello, welcome, you know, blah blah blah.
To be a little more embracing.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
and a part of it might have been me being my shyness being mistaken for standoffishness. That could be possible.
Sure.
But for whatever reason, it didn't work out. But I knew about all this stuff by now: BDSM, professional DOMs, and so on. And so I tried several professional DOMs and didn't really click with any of them. And until I called this one, and this would have been around like 1989 or 90 something. I called Mistress Nadine, and some of your older viewers may remember her. She had a dungeon. It was called A Basement, because it was in a basement, and that's her sense of humor.
Yes.
And
I
her
like
brother made bondage equipment, and he made wonderful bondage equipment for her. I'll tell you all about it sometime. Maybe he'd still do it on commission, and I would buy you some of it.
Oh.
But, anyhow, Mistress,
That's me.
Mistress, that is you. That is you, Erin. Mistress Nadine's name is Erin, and ever since I knew her, and we've stayed friends. I mean, we only saw each other as a professional dom and submissive for like 2 years, and she retired from the business. But we have stayed friends all these years, like 20 some years. And her lifelong thing was she wanted to own a restaurant. And this is where the plug comes. Can I give a plug?
Yeah,
Do it.
definitely.
The first time Miss Lucy and Miss D and I ever went out to dinner was maybe the second time I was here.
Yeah.
And I took them to Aaron's restaurant. It's called Grindhouse.
Very delicious food.
Yeah. We
Cool.
ate
And
so
the vibe-
much.
And the vibe is super lively but calm.
Yeah.
Like, you know, not chaotic at all.
Exactly. And
Lively and calm, yeah.
of course, Miss Lucy likes to order, and this time she didn't get to. I think Aaron picked the food and brought it out, and we stayed for a long time. And Aaron picked the wine for us, and we were leaving, and I said, we're ready for the check," and she says, "Oh, damn, I forgot to write anything down. I guess you guys are just going to have to not pay tonight." You know, that would have been like a big bill too. So thank you, Aaron.
Yeah, thank you,
Thank
Erin.
you so much.
And I should also mention it's in Red Hook, and she got. I mean, do you know how many restaurants in New York City would kill for a positive New York Times review?
Yeah.
She got one,
Yeah.
and you can Google it or whatever you want to do and read it. But yes, Grindhouse and Red Hook, and Aaron are the top of my list. So, but Aaron retired, and I had to move on.
Well, what I really love about, like, you know, when you were telling us about your relationship with her is this idea that a lot of people don't think that these relationships can last longer than whatever, and they think that they stay within a session, and sometimes they do, you know, like any,
Yes.
like in any business, sometimes they're just your client and you keep it at that. But sometimes those relationships can grow, and they can be deeper, and they can be lifelong, and they can be supportive and lasting and really beautiful. And I think that's a big misconception that I always like to clarify when we talk to the people we interview, when we talk to, or and people that are our current clients don't even realize that building this type of relationship is possible. And there's no problem with that, and there's a appropriate way of doing it. But
Yeah,
I mean,
as long as both people are interested in the
Yeah.
relationship and there are mutual benefits as well as chemistry involved, I think that it's always a possibility.
Yeah.
It's just not something to come expecting.
yeah, sincerity, right? Like
Yes.
if someone is sincere about it. But I think a lot of people fail to understand that, kink and BDSM relationships can be really just profound.
Yes, it's not just a cold bargain. It is much, much, much more than that.
So tell us about your experiences with Mistress Nadine, and what about her that surpassed all the other DOMs that you saw?
Yeah.
Had seen up to that
Had seen,
point,
yeah.
yes. She was funny. We could laugh during a session, and she did great bondage.
Great bondage,
And
yes.
as you both know, that is my favorite thing in the world, along with service. And perhaps later we can talk. I spent a lot of years trying to figure out why I was the way I was, and perhaps later I think I figured out some of that.
So how did you figure that out?
Well,
Oh, we can come back to that.
Okay.
More on Mistress Nadine.
well, I mean, there's not a lot more. We had a wonderful time. Every time I saw her every week for a session, and then often we would earlier in the week, we would do dinner or a concert or something. And we there's no way we were ever like boyfriend girlfriend.
Right.
It wasn't even.
But you can still enjoy somebody's
Yes.
company outside of the boyfriend girlfriend
and
paradigm.
we enjoyed each other's company.
That's
and
wonderful.
we still do.
Yeah.
And then,
And by the way, Erin is feeling a little under the weather, so we should wish her well.
Oh.
She's having to push herself very hard.
Stay hydrated, Erin.
so then so she retired,
Yes.
right? And then you were kind of a little lost.
I was at loose ends, and
So what did you do?
I kept trying different DOMs because I was by that time turned off with Tess, and I was just like, that's not happening for me.
Right.
Yeah.
But I need company. I need somebody in
You
the community.
persisted.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I needed somebody like Erin or like you, who it wasn't just a commercial transaction.
Right. It was a need.
It was a need, and you fill that need.
Right.
You fill that need. You give me what I need in a gracious, flowing and creative way. And I should say, I have nothing to say about what our sessions are like. You plan them and you execute them, and they are exquisite always. But some of them make me cry.
Oh, yay! Well,
But-
music to my ears.
But
So after Nadine, where did you?
well, I saw another woman. I'm not going to name any names. We saw each other, maybe for 4 or 5 months. And
A professional.
Yeah, professional. And it was clear to me that she had mental issues,
Yeah.
and I stopped seeing her when she was on a bipolar high, and she had me tied up, and she wouldn't let me go. And
This was during a professional.
this was during a professional session.
Wow.
And she was in another room working on her computer, and I was gagged, and I couldn't get loose, and I kept making noises and struggling, and I was probably there for somewhere between 3 and 4 hours.
Wow.
And
So did you have fear at that point?
I was scared to death.
Okay.
I was scared to death. And so anyhow, she finally came to let me loose, cussing me out the whole time and screaming at me. And she undid the gag, and all I did was agreed with everything she said until I was free enough to stand up, and I put my clothes on and left, and I said, "You'll never see me again."
That's so terrible.
Yeah.
Yes.
That
Well,
sounds
unfortunately-
traumatizing.
Unfortunately, I did see her again much later in my life, but
Oh.
Okay.
you know, this. I don't want to make this a sad story. That was like
Well, it's
one of the two
it's a
worst
part of
things
life,
that happened.
you know,
it
we're
happens.
not-
Yes.
we're not focusing on any one
And you
emotion.
You know, I think you learn from that situation, right? You learned sort of.
Well, I learned there's danger, and you have to be able to judge people, and
Mm-hmm.
my judgment isn't always correct, and
And
my libido sometimes gets ahead of my brain.
That's every man.
I think you're right.
so then, after this really horrible experience, where did you go from there?
I went into depression,
Oh, no.
where I have been on and off for a lot of my adult life, and this one was severe. And I've been told, and I believe it's true, that depression is simply anger turned inward on yourself. And I think I must have been very, very angry at this woman, and I think I couldn't bring myself to express it outwardly or to her, so I turned it in on myself. But eventually, and this lasted, probably almost a year, but eventually I started looking for somebody again. And right after 9/11, there was a new woman came to town. Her name was Domina M. And I think I might have been her first or second client.
Oh, wow.
I can't remember for sure. But we clicked immediately on all the same levels that I clicked with Aaron. And it ended up that we saw each other almost every Saturday for 8 years.
Wow.
So every time she posts like a little clip on Twitter of her doing something, like she was like screwing a guy with a strap on the other day, and so I wrote like, "How come you never did that to me in the 416 sessions we had?" Because 8 years, 406 times,
That's
52.
so many.
Yeah, so it's a lot of sessions, but I would imagine we had at least 400 sessions together.
Wow.
And she writes back and says, "There's still time." And I said, "Well, you should ask Mistress Lucy and Goddess Dia, because I would love to do a threesome." And Domina M knows about the show, and I hope she's listening, but she might listen tomorrow because she lives in Paris and it's a different time zone.
It is.
It's like 3 o'clock in the morning there now.
So let's go back to how you figured out that this was something that you needed.
Well,
Because you never really gave up, even though you went through some tough times with yourself, you were very affected by like a pretty traumatic experience with a dom.
yes.
But that didn't mean that you were going to quit.
No.
So, like,
Well,
how did
I'm
you?
sorry.
Go ahead. How did you figure it out that this was something that you need?
Well, I went to therapy, and you learn that a lot of the things that you experience and do over and over again as an adult are a result of childhood trauma. And I didn't really have good memories of my childhood. I mean, clear memories. I don't mean good or bad. I mean clear memories. But so I started investigating. I talked to my aunt, who was my dad's sister, and she told me what had happened when I was a child. When I was born, I was the firstborn, and my mother got severe postpartum depression. And I mean, back then, this would have been 1952. They didn't even have a name for it, let alone a treatment. And as a result, I could never bond. My mother didn't pay any attention to me. My aunt came down to our house. She lived up the street, and she came down every day and made sure that I was changed and fed and so on. And this was for 3 years. And
Did your aunt replace your mother in terms of affection, or was she just taking care of the mechanics of raising you?
It was mostly the mechanics, but it was. I mean, she loved me. I
Yeah.
mean, there was affection,
Sure.
and I loved her back. And as a matter of fact, I cared a lot more when she died than when my mother died.
Right.
Because she was the one who really raised you.
She's the one who she saved me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She saved me, just like women like you saved me, in many ways. It's true. It's true. But
But your mother's postpartum depression left like a hole in you.
oh,
some way,
it left a
because-
big jagged hole.
Because you guys didn't get to bond.
And yes, and then it lasted 3 years,
Mm-hmm.
and then my sister was born, and my mother snapped out of her postpartum depression with the birth of my sister, and my sister was her be all and end all, and I was just the little rugrat that had to be fed and clothed, and so I mean, you go places, you go in a diner or anywhere, and you see a mother with her little baby, and they're gazing into each other's eyes, and you can see love, and you can see,
Closeness and
yeah,
intimacy.
and the mother would do anything for that baby.
Yeah.
I mean, and I never had that,
That makes,
and
that makes me
I
teary-eyed
I
right
felt very unsafe as a result.
now. Okay.
And as I got a little bit older, I think this is where the service part comes in, is I would do anything to make my mother like me.
Yeah.
And she never did, but I kept trying. I would like vacuum the floor, I would, dust, I would clean, without being asked, just whatever I thought would make her happy, that's what I would do.
Mhm.
And
And it never worked.
no, it never worked.
Okay.
So when you were in therapy, did anything spark you going to therapy, or was this something that you kind of realized? Because for you to go to therapy is very uncommon. Maybe not as uncommon now, but the idea of therapy is still very stigmatized for a lot of people, especially in small towns, certain cultures. Asian culture is a big one. You being a very blue-collared family, that's usually another group that doesn't want to go to therapy. So what sparked you, beyond seeing that there were issues, what sparked you to go to therapy?
Well, by this time, I was 40 years old maybe, and what sparked me was that I was suffering these recurring rounds of depression. I was ashamed of myself. I believed that who I was and what I liked was wrong, and it was despicable, and if anybody knew, I would be ridiculed or worse. And so it was a question of therapy or suicide, essentially.
Okay.
A little self-preservation.
So through your investigations, you went back into history and talked to your aunt.
And then when my mom died, I went back and talked to some of her friends, and they essentially reinforced what my aunt had told me about my childhood. So
Okay. And you had no recollection of any of this?
not until after my sister was born.
Okay.
I had no memories of before.
Right.
I just have witness testimony, as us lawyers say.
So how did that make you feel, kind of going back and seeing that because of this sort of really traumatic experience with your mother and things like that, that sort of explains maybe certain aspects of you?
Well,
How did that make you feel?
it made me feel like I wasn't like everybody else, to be sure, but I wasn't a bad person. I hadn't done anything to cause this. I just was who I was as a result of my environment and what happened. And I think I could be wrong, and there's a lot of room for disagreement. I think if you're gay, I think you're born that way. I think that's just who you are. If you're into BDSM, I don't personally. I believe that that is created. I don't believe you're born that way. I believe that something happens.
Right.
It might be something small that you take and make big in your mind, but that's my belief, and
Okay.
that's as a result of my own personal experience.
Okay. Well, surely. I mean, you clearly have a pathology to the reasons that you are feeling that the reasons that you came to where you are now.
Yeah.
Like,
Yes.
because of your mother and her inability to bond with you.
So do you think through therapy and then you having this really great relationship with Domina M and Aaron and having
And you?
this, well, we are not at us yet.
Okay.
We're still, we haven't got to that part. But do you think through those things you became to accept yourself a lot more?
Oh,
and
I
really
did.
Was,
Mhm.
okay.
I did want that started when I was in Black Rose in Washington,
Yeah.
D.C.
Oh, that's great.
And yes, I did accept myself, but I was still very, very secretive outside of my own little community. And I still am to some extent. I mean, there may be those who recognize me on the show, but
Just to let everybody know that we had the option to cover Big Baby G's face, like, completely, to mask his identity, and he told us that he was very proud of who he was, and that he was not ashamed, and that he wanted to appear without costume or without any sort of obscuring thing.
well, what I wanted was that, and I know it's a lot better today, and it's more open today, but I know there are a lot of men and some women who are submissive in one way or another, or masochistic or a slave or whatever, and they're ashamed of it. I know just you posted that little thing of me doing your clown dance on Twitter today, and somebody responded to you.
Yes.
I would humble myself to be allowed to do that.
Yes.
And I wrote back that I'm not humbled, I'm exhilarated. That's how I feel, and I don't want other submissive men in particular to go through that. I want them, and I'm not saying, like, go to work in your latex bodysuit. I'm just saying, don't be ashamed of yourself.
Yeah.
Glory in who you are. I've learned to do that. It's clearly approaching, not the end of my life, but I can see mortality around the corner, and I'm grateful that I've come to this point. I do think I have a certain understanding of why I am the way I am, and I've come to the conclusion that it doesn't really matter that much. Why?
Because you can't change any of it.
Because I can't change any of it.
But you do embrace, or you allow the ropes to embrace you.
Yes.
You do embrace what you are now, and you celebrate it in some ways as well.
Well, I do celebrate it. I mean, you can tell I'm here with you.
Yes. This is his party hat, in case you couldn't tell.
This is some young a-hole once at a party. We were arguing about music, and he called me an aging Brooklyn hipster, and he thought it was an insult. And I mean, I didn't think it was an insult.
You're like, thanks, man.
Hey, okay, man.
So then that's after, because Domina M moved, which is...
Yes, she did, and it was very sad. And she took great care to find somebody who would take over for her
Oh.
after I left. Yes, and it just didn't work out. I mean,
Oh.
the chemistry wasn't there. It was nobody's fault. The chemistry just wasn't there.
And then you...
And then?
Well,
Lost little lamb again.
yeah. Then I had to go back to my hometown for a while because my aunt was dying, and while I was there, the woman who had tied me up and left me on the floor for hours made contact and seemed relatively sane, and I always and don't take this the wrong way, I'm always attracted to dangerous women, not just powerful women and strong women, but dangerous women as well.
Like crazy women.
No, well, This
little
time,
danger. This
yeah,
time it
this
veered
time,
on that
yeah,
side.
like this time it went to the other
Unstable
side of
way.
the edge. Yes, and
Okay.
so we tried, and she moved in for a short while, and it did not work at all. It ended very, very badly and ugly.
So
And-
you've had DS relationships with both professionals and non-professionals.
Yes, I've had live-in relationships with
Uh-huh.
both. Yes, I have.
And from what I can tell from your stories as of right now, it seems like the professional relationships are a little more safe because it's all within the confines of like the session.
Yeah,
It
and
is.
And then everything else is optional.
Yes.
But it sounds like this relationship that you're talking about was, even though it started out professionally, it
It didn't stay that way
Okay.
for very long.
I see.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, it stopped staying that way the minute I spent 3.5 hours on the floor tied up,
Yeah.
asking to be let loose.
So this was a traumatic experience, but you decided to go back to it anyway.
I'm not claiming to be completely sane.
Well,
No,
I'm just
no.
clarifying. I'm just
Well, I
clarifying.
think this is
I did decide to
I
try
think
it.
this is a bit of a commentary on abusive relationships, right? Where people wonder why. Why do women stay?
Mhm.
You know, men stay
Men stay too.
as well, and it's because we have, you know, different needs and emotions, and we, when in it, are not always seeing, and it's not very easy, and it's not very
Rational.
yeah, but it's also not someone's place to say, like, why can't you see it? Because as we all know, in any high emotional situation, when you're in it, it's never as clear as when you've walked away and looked back,
Right.
right?
Yes.
And
Right.
That is so
Hindsight
true.
is always
Yes.
20/20. Yeah.
And so then, you know, I really like this word you use, dangerous, because I think it's not a bad thing. You know, I think danger is on a spectrum, right? You've got risk that you're willing to take, you know, that's kind of doing like certain sports that you know are kind of scary, and then there's just like really dangerous activities. And it seems like this attraction to dangerous women on this level, unfortunately, was on the part of the spectrum that was unhealthy.
It was over the line by
Yeah.
far.
And so this relationship, how long did it last, this kind of second iteration of it?
Well, the second iteration was for a couple of years. It was mostly a social media relationship with seeing each other maybe 3 or 4 times without ever playing.
Okay.
And then something happened in her life that she was having some hard times, and she asked, could she come and live with me?
Yeah.
So I said yes. It was against my better judgment.
Yeah.
It was like I saw a train wreck coming. I saw the train coming down the tracks, and I knew. I mean, I told my psychologist, I said, I can see this coming. This is going to be a train wreck. But I've told her yes, and she's moving in. We have a date, and and it happened.
And then, how long was that for?
Less than a month.
Oh wow,
Oh yes, I mean,
that was a fast train.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if you want the gory details of what happened, but I mean, one night she just was so off the rails that it scared me to death.
Yeah.
And I knew it couldn't.
Continue.
No, it couldn't. I mean, she needed help, but there was nothing I could do to give it to her.
Yeah. You couldn't be that crutch.
Right.
and
Did
all
you
No.
that
did you
stuff.
try? Like, did you want to?
I
Be
definitely wanted
Uh-huh.
to, but I mean, on this particular night, she said, "I don't feel safe with you. I don't feel safe with you at all." And she went out, and she said, "I'm not going to stay here." She went out, and she was gone for a little while, and I mean, it was kind of a fight. And I called my therapist, and I was on the phone with her, and the woman came back in, and I just put my phone to my side to see what she wanted, the woman who was living with me. And she said, "I'm not safe around you, and I'm calling the police right now, and I'm going to tell them that you assaulted me and you threatened to rape me. And I thought, Jesus, what's going on here? And I held up the phone and I said, did you hear that, Sandy? And she said, yes, I heard enough. And the woman's face just kind of fell, and I said, you have to leave tonight.
Yeah.
You tell me where you want your things sent, and I will send them. But you, and that was hard for me, being a submissive, to be able to do that. But I did it because it had to be done, and
Well, you
I
have
want to
your
live.
own boundaries too. Like even as a submissive man, it's
Yes.
very important to speak up.
Yes,
You know?
and to have boundaries.
Yes.
Yeah, and to know what's healthy and not healthy. And I think there's the conversation of abuse in the BDSM community gets really shut down because we're always trying to portray this like really amazing image, but like it happens.
Yes, it's not
unfortunately.
idyllic. The
No.
BDSM community is like the rest of the world. It's not idyllic,
Mhm.
but I think it's better than most of the world.
Well-
The relationships I've had
Yeah.
have by
Yeah.
far been
Well, there's
better.
characteristics of people who participate in BDSM that make you much more open-minded, more communicative.
Yes.
It's. I think I agree with you. I think participating in BDSM can add to your personality and give you characteristics that expand you as a person. But
You're
it's not devoid of abuse
Mhm.
that can happen.
Yeah, and
you know?
abuse actually does happen under the guise of BDSM a lot of times, which is really awful because sometimes people conflate the two,
Yeah.
yes.
which is why we are so vocal about everything that we do under the umbrella of BDSM being consensual.
Yeah.
Like
Yes.
That's always number one and paramount to everything that we do.
Because this whole relationship obviously was, especially what she said afterwards, was very non-consensual. It was based on lies and manipulation
Right.
and so many other things.
Yes,
So
so-
that ended.
And we can move past that now,
Yeah.
please.
And you didn't go back to it.
Yeah.
I did not go back
Okay.
to
And
it. And
then-
she asked many times,
Uh-huh.
and I stayed strong. I
And
had a
then
great therapist.
where did you go from there?
Into myself, depression.
So you had a second bout of depression, and did you seek therapy?
I was in therapy.
You were
I
already in
had Sandy, and she was great. She that night she dropped what she was doing and she came over to my house.
Yeah.
And stayed there and helped me get this woman out. And
Yeah.
I mean, that's above and beyond the call of her duty, but she did it. So that brings us to you.
Oh, so how soon after that relationship ended did you find us, and how
2
did you
years.
find us?
2 years.
2 years.
Yeah. 2
What
years.
did you do in the interim? Did you tie yourself up?
No, no, I'm long past that stage. I need, when that happens, I need to be so I can't get out. And if you do it to yourself, you have to be able to get out. So no,
Yeah.
that's no longer a thrill for me.
Okay.
Uh,
So just sorry to interrupt you, but I just want to let our viewers know that we're happy to answer any and all questions that are politely written after we're done with the interview.
We'll have a little Q&A section.
So please hold your questions until later.
All right, so 2 years. So you were kind of just,
I was just a lump,
yeah.
I mean, I did my work.
But you're also
I'm-
figuring yourself out and
I'm
getting
figuring myself
yourself
out.
into a better place.
And I'm trying to help other people. I mean, I'm retired, but I do some legal work for small pay, sometimes pro bono.
Yeah.
Oftentimes I get appointed by courts to be guardian of various incompetent people that can't take care of themselves.
Yeah.
And I find that very, very rewarding. It doesn't pay a lot, but it pays a little bit. And sometimes I do it free.
Yeah.
It just
So it
depends.
must be fulfilling for you to do it at all.
Look, I've been a political activist all my life. I grew up in the Vietnam War era, and I saw up close and personal what our government was doing overseas, and I saw At the same time, our same government shoot down students on campuses in the United States because they were protesting that war. And it turned me into an activist. And I've always tried to work on the right side of things. I worked for unions. I worked for individuals that were discriminated against on the job. That's how I made my living. I did any kind of progressive work that I could do, and I'm still trying to do that.
That's great. Yeah. So then that's how you came to us. So when did the search start again?
I looked, I mean, I knew I wanted, I didn't know exactly what I wanted, but I knew I wanted to feel safe. And I read, first I came across the Maison de Rouge website, and I read every word, and I was fascinated. And then I read both of your individual sites, and I just said to myself, I'm going to ask these when I have a feeling, and I'm going to ask them if they'll see me. And luckily you said yes. And we had the first session.
On my birthday.
On your birthday. And I knew after the first session, I knew halfway through the first session that these are the women I want to belong to. I hope they choose me.
Aww. We chose you. That was a really, that was a lot of information, and thank you for sharing all of it.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
You solved my bondage question the first time, well, the second or third time we went out to lunch or dinner.
Bondage question.
Well, I figured out the service question, why I like service so much. You know, when I was doing everything I could for my mom,
right,
because I thought it would make her like me.
Okay.
But there was no payoff.
Right.
But if I am of service to you, I get a good boy. I get something else.
He gets a little freedom.
Yes, I get a little freedom.
Yes.
I get whatever you want to give me, and so that's the service part. And I think it was maybe the second or third time we were talking, and it was lunch.
I remember.
And you, Miss Dia, asked me, how do you feel? You like bondage so much. How does it make you feel? And I said, it makes me feel safe and secure. It's the only time in my life I feel safe.
It's like a very womb-like feeling.
Well, that's what you
It
said.
Yeah.
Mistress Lucy said, well, did you ever consider that the last place you were safe was in your mother's womb?
Yeah.
You couldn't move. You couldn't move your arms or legs or anything, and you were safe, and you knew it. And then you were born, and she didn't do what she was supposed to do, and you were never safe again. And bondage makes you feel safe.
Yeah.
So those are the mysteries figured out.
Yes.
And there's a payoff, and it became emotional and spiritual and psychic and sexual. I put all those things into it, both the bondage and the service, and it works for me.
Yeah.
And hopefully I've found a match that it works for you two as well.
I feel like the BDSM that you've always sought out as a need to supplement kind of like the talk therapy that you've gone through, and also figuring a lot of things out about your life, those two have worked really well for you.
Yes.
And that had you not found one or the other, your life could have gone in a very different direction.
Yes.
Especially with depression being kind of a reoccurring thing that happens.
Well, yes, my therapist once told me that if it hadn't been for the depression, I could have been like a sociopath or something. The depression and the BDSM are what saved me. And the BDSM is very, I mean, it's just, I can't say how meaningful it is to me. This connection, it's like electric, you know. I said at the start, if you're a vanilla person, you can't imagine, I don't believe, the depth and the intensity of what happens in a BDSM relationship. And it's amazing.
Not to shame any vanilla people.
No,
You guys are having a great time.
Look,
But there is more of a tendency to when you play in a BDSM way to involve the entire body, like psychologically and physically, and not specifically just genitally, which does happen a lot in vanilla sex.
Yeah, there's more of a connection because you're aware of these other things that are going on and not just sort of taking it for granted and slapping body parts together.
Bumping your crotches.
well, this fits into this. I think.
So
You've made like really weird things fit into things that aren't actually made for them.
She has a gift for that.
I like to play scientist.
She's like a pervy Tetris champ.
Yes, she is. Yes, she is.
Well, since we're a little over, but we wanted to kind of open it up for any questions because there were a few people asking questions.
Now is the time.
So you're welcome to ask questions. Or do you have any spiritual disciplines that complement your sexuality?
That's a really great question.
Yeah.
I am learning.
You are learning.
Mistress Lucy had me get a book. I forget the title. It's
No
Zen.
mud, no lotus.
Yes.
Is that it?
No,
Oh,
it's
no.
a step is or
A peaceful step.
a peaceful step. Yes.
It's a mindfulness book.
It's a mindfulness book, and I've read the book. I've listened to the audio book. I try to put it into practice, and it tells you, the first thing it tells you is breathing, and you breathe in, and you say, "This is my body," and you breathe out, and you smile, and you say, "I'm happy it is," and you do other things with it, and you do just go in and out, and it's just breathing, and then you. It gets more and more advanced. I mean, I think it's kind of a Buddhist philosophy, which I am finding very helpful and calming. So that's spiritually what I do now.
Yeah.
And sometimes when I'm feeling really bad, and this is almost never ever the case, but I'll just reach out just to touch on social media, Miss Lucy or Miss Dia, and just for the connection.
Yeah.
Just for the connection.
Yeah. And we are very connected.
Seem to really care about and value and appreciate baby as a person.
We do.
We do. I think a big part of our philosophy behind Kink and BDSM and why we've devoted ourselves into it is through that connection. Supremacists. So I guess this is an add-on to that question of
Right. Some doms and female supremacists like to treat their subs as replaceable. Well, I mean,
We are.
that's also true. I
Yeah.
mean, both of these things can be true. It doesn't mean that you stop caring for somebody once you replace them. It just means that cycle of relationship has ended, and perhaps it's not serving either person anymore.
Yeah.
And sometimes people come into BDSM relationships with a not so pure intention, and a lot of times that does end in being replaced.
Yeah. So
All
If you
things are
have
true.
that, it will manifest itself
Right.
at some point.
yeah.
It's like any relationship.
Nothing is 100% pure, I believe, but this, to me, I mean, you two women are primary in my life. I put nothing above you, and I know you can't, by the nature.
How about the cats?
No.
Oh yeah.
They
Answer
can
that
go.
question.
They better not be watching.
They're not watching. I have a baby.
They better not be watching.
They have a baby. But I know that I can't and never will be the primary thing in your lives. But I know that I can be of value to you and can be valued by you, and that's my goal. And I just wanted to. I mean, if I could just freeze time and stay like this for the rest of my life, I would die happy.
Well, we intend to be there on your deathbed.
So he clarified about value, and I think, value is a very interesting thing. Value is subjective, right? And because value is subjective, you really, when you're trying to see a dom, it's about connection, and it might take a little bit to find someone that you connect with.
Mm-hmm. To what?
Sometimes you're not quite sure, but you grow to what a what?
So sometimes even
You
value
need to
can,
put that question
the
back
value
again.
between two people in a relationship can change and
Yeah.
evolve and even fluctuate. And so we value Big Baby G as a person because he's come to us as, like, first of all, very respectful, submissive, looking to serve. And he has always done everything in a very respectful manner. And it's not that we only value that about him, it's his approach to life that is valuable to us and in general too. But there may come a time when his value to us is slightly different. And that's, neither here nor there. That's to be determined in the future. So as long as he is always respectful to us and we consider ourselves like carrying dominance, I think that the relationship will keep growing.
Yeah, and
as
it's very much what you put in as well. There are a lot of people who come to us in this very demanding way, and then they wonder why they don't have this caring relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're going to demand and expect stuff from us, then we're not willing to give you anything more. So it really goes both ways in so many ways. All three of yours, I appreciate it.
Oh, that's such a sweet
Thank you.
comment,
Thank
youthful explorer.
Someone did ask, how long have you been a slave? So I guess that question is interesting because you've kind of slaved for different people.
I've never been a slave before.
Really? Not even
I've-
to Domina M?
I was her submissive.
You were her submissive.
But outside of sessions, I always deferred. I always deferred to her.
Mm-hmm.
And it was interesting. My office was down at the end of Broadway, close to Wall Street, and she had a dungeon about a block away.
Oh, yeah.
And some afternoons I would be sitting there, and my phone would ring, and the secretary would say, I won't say the name, and I would pick it up, and of course it was Domina, and she would say, I feel the need for a cup of pistachio ice cream, and I would like it in 20 minutes, please. And I would have to get up and leave work and find pistachio ice cream and take it. So
Well, she knew how to use her submissives.
yeah, and I would have been her slave had that been in the cards,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
but
You had slaving tasks.
I had tasks.
You were
which-
trained. by
Yeah.
She
her.
trained me
Yeah.
quite well. I went to
Yeah.
her, and I owe her a lot. I owe Erin a lot,
Mm-hmm.
and I owe you a lot.
How do you do? Okay, that's a really good question. Week for Goddess. So a sub is somebody that identifies as a submissive and sees a professional, and a lot of times there's like the submission happens within the confines of a session, say like 2 hours or so, and then maybe they go back to their normal day in their normal life with their family or at their work, and they're not necessarily submissive or anything outside of the BDSM scene. A slave is somebody who is inherently submissive and who is also made some kind of verbal agreement with their owner or their master to become trained by their owner or master to serve their owner or master, as well as to be basically submissive to this other person by default wherever they are, whether they're in a scene or not.
For me, I think it's and I think this is kind of like the definitions are really based on, how you define it. For me, like submissive and slave is sort of on a spectrum, and it's an identity spectrum where I think you can kind of go in and out of being submissive and a slave in different parts of your life. And some people define feel that they're submissive through and through in every part of their life. Sometimes they only feel that they're sexually submissive, so that can vary. And then, of course, you can play slave in fantasy, or you can really identify as being a slave, which I think is a deeper version of submission, where you really want to serve somebody on a very consistent basis and not just during these like fantasy scenes. And so I think that's just a little bit deeper, and it really depends. Some people identify as submissive and they don't like to use the term slave. Some people identify as slave because they feel like it's a deeper, intense word that they really they want to identify by. But I don't think there is too much of a variation. I think it's a spectrum in that sense, and it's about how you identify. Some people don't like to use that word, but they have very, quote unquote slave-like tendencies, but they just don't use that word, And I think it's an identity in that. So I think with you, would you consider yourself our submissive or our slave?
I'm your slave.
Yeah. See? So, and it varies. And, even though Big Baby G was doing I would say very slave-like things for Domina M, in their relationship, that's not what it was defined as. But in our relationship, that is what it's defined as. So not only is Big Baby G a submissive man, but he's our slave because we've defined it that way.
Yeah, we've had a conversation about it, and there are adornments that also indicate and remind him of his ownership, or of his position with us constantly. And so in this particular relationship, he is our slave, and we are his owners. I think for some people,
and he has a chastity cage.
Yes. And for some people, the conversation never comes up, and so the difference between submissive and slave is more about ownership, but that's not true for everybody. It really is subjective to definition.
As a slave, do you still feel like you can have limits, or do you trust your owners so much you don't?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
I think what it means is like some people, so this idea of consensual non-consent, right?
Or blanket consent.
Yes, no,
Yes.
I trust you.
Right. But we have been made aware that Big Baby G has certain health conditions, and he's very fair, and so he gets sunburned easily, and there are limits to what we would not expose him to out of health reasons and care, but he has not said anything about like, my hard limit is sunburn.
Yeah.
Right.
So
No, that is your choice. That is your choice,
right.
not mine.
And it's also an open conversation, which it should be, like he...
Spinach.
Yes.
Is your hard limit spinach?
No, I have not found a hard limit with you.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
sure there is, but I see it as symbiotic. You give me what I need, but you're the ones that determine what it is I need.
Mm-hmm.
I don't get to pick
And you
what
trust
I need.
that
And I trust that you will. Well, you'll make whatever choices you make,
right.
and I will accept that. So you give me what I need, and in turn, I give you what you want.
Yeah.
And it's symbiotic, and for me, joyful.
Yeah, I think also it really depends on the relationship, regarding like having limits or blanket consent, because sometimes if you're in a relationship like Big Baby G was with this woman who was not necessarily always stable, I think that verbally stating your limits with somebody like that makes it more known, so that this other person, if they're crossing your boundaries, that they're doing it consciously.
Yeah.
And then with people that are, I guess, a little more caring and stable, that doesn't always need to be stated up front, even though further on down the line that may be another conversation as things evolve.
And if I could just say one other thing to particularly the submissive men out there, do not ever let anybody think that because you're a submissive that you're some kind of wuss.
I like that you use the word wuss. Because I hate when people use the word pussy.
I would
because
never do that.
Pussies are strong.
Yes, and that's another
and resilient.
thing.
And they can take a beating.
And they
Yes, we can.
give life.
Yes, they are where everybody comes from.
Well, aside from the fireworks in our orgasms, there's another thing that submissive men have over vanilla men is we have a natural respect for women. That I think the testosterone-driven, heterosexual, 30-something male who has grown up in this society and this culture does not have that natural respect for women. And I think I view that as an advantage for me.
We like it too.
Yeah.
Good.
I think more men need to get in touch with their submissive side. Yeah. Any other questions before we close out?
There have been some really great questions
Yeah,
tonight.
great
Thank you guys for
questions,
tuning in and for
Indeed,
being
thank
so
you.
respectful and attentive.
Yeah. Well, so we'll just close out with some little announcements. So little announcements is that I will be in Chicago and I will be interviewing a very well-known mistress in Chicago, and I won't announce it yet. But I'll only be there for one day
exciting.
taking sessions, so feel free to contact me on Lucy Sweetkill.
How does a sub convey their purest intentions? Communication and service. I think those two go hand in hand.
Bingo.
If there is only one and not the other, it can be a little confusing, I think.
Yeah.
But service is also like it speaks louder, in my opinion. But I think communication is extremely important.
It's a good thing it speaks louder because, as you both know, I sometimes have trouble communicating verbally. I'm just too deferential, maybe sometimes.
Well, we help you with that.
You do.
Yes.
You
Yes.
do.
So we are also going to be monitoring.
Torture Garden. Yeah.
Yes, we're going to be monitoring the VIP dungeon at Torture Garden, and this will be, I believe, the first time that Torture Garden has come to New York.
Saturday the 23rd, June 23rd.
Yes, and that the tickets are still available for that. I will tweet that so you guys can. I will retweet it so you guys can get tickets if you'd like, and. I think that the pricing is tiered because the dungeon is only VIP access, something like that, but come and get spanked.
So we'll be there. And then anything else?
Do you have any announcements?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I think that's all.
I have one announcement. I will be less available in July, in the beginning to mid-July, as well as not available in August because I'm going to put myself through summer school and I'm going to start learning a lot of really interesting skills to add to my BDSM toolbox. So all of that information will also be available on my Twitter.
Well, thank you guys for joining, and for those of you who will watch this afterwards, hopefully you've got a lot of information. I thought that was a really great interview, Big Baby G.
It was a
Thank
great
you.
Good
message
boy.
to end on as well.
Good boy. Oh,
And
I got a
thank
good
you.
boy.
Thank you guys again for tuning in and being so respectful. And we'll see you next Monday.
Bye.